I sure wish I had some new clothes to wear. A gown would be great. Hello.
You called? Welcome to the farm at the American Revolution Museum at Yorktown. Today, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. Before we can get to the point of showing you how people in the past got dressed, we actually have to make the clothing that our interpreters wear here on site. So today, I have a special project with Sarah here, and I'm going to make her a gown using techniques that were used in the 18th century. Because you couldn't just walk into a store and have tons of ready-made clothing available. There was a little bit of ready-made clothing, but it was very specific items that could fit a variety of bodies, such as shirts or shifts or unfitted short gowns, those sorts of things. But when it came to more fitted garments like men's coats, waistcoats, breeches, or women's gowns like the one that I'm wearing, you really needed to have the knowledge and skill of a tailor or a Mantua-Maker, which was the 18th century word for a dressmaker, to know how to cut and fit those types of clothing. So this wasn't something that the average farm wife knew how to do. Certainly, women knew how to sew and were very skilled seamstresses, but the average farm wife, the average wife in a household, is probably going to be sewing simple things like shirts and shifts, table linens, bed linens, other household items, because those are normally cut with geometry. There isn't any complex measuring or fitting involved in those things. However, those types of items, especially shirts and shifts, you can see Sarah here is wearing a shift, which is the basic female undergarment. Those require extremely fine, skilled stitching because those are the garments that are going to be laundered time and time again and boiled and scrubbed, so they need to be able to withstand that kind of treatment. But the outer clothing, since that's not going to get dunked in water and boiled and scrubbed, that doesn't need quite as fine stitching, but it does require skill to cut and fit the clothing. So today, I am essentially portraying an itinerant Mantua-Maker or dressmaker. And Mantua-Makers could either have a shop set up where customers could come to them to have clothing made, or the Mantua-Maker could go to people's houses and fit them in their house. So that's a bit more of an economical choice because then the Mantua-Maker isn't paying for a shop front. And really, Mantua making doesn't require a lot of specialized equipment. I'm not a weaver, so I don't need a loom or a spinning wheel or anything like that. My tools are very portable. I need scissors, needle, thread, and pins, and that's it. So I can travel wherever the work is. You might be thinking, well, if a woman is having clothing custom made for her, that's got to be pretty expensive, right? But it's actually not. Labor in the 18th century is very cheap. So having a gown custom made and hand sewn for you is not an expensive, special purchase like we might think of having a wedding gown custom made today. It's absolutely nothing like that because that's just the way clothing was made. We don't have sewing machines in this point in the 18th century, so the fact that something is sewn by hand is just the way it was done. There's really nothing special about that. But the investment is going to be in the fabric. And oftentimes, the cost of the garment, the fabric that is purchased for that garment costs more for the purchaser than my labor as a Mantua-Maker. So having clothing custom made for you, again, is not this elite thing. It's something that everybody has done. There are many, many tailors and many Mantua-Makers out there in the 18th century plying their trade because everybody needs clothing. And tailors and Mantua-Makers are also making clothing for enslaved people. Because while some large plantations are able to provide textiles, fabric, to enslaved people that is then turned into clothing, On smaller scale farms such as this one, it would probably be more common to purchase or have clothing made for enslaved people. But we also know that enslaved people could be very skilled seamstresses. And that was a skill that for enslaved women could allow them to make some extra income if possible, and to have different employment opportunities. So at this point, we are in the very early stages of making this gown for Sarah. And as I mentioned, the gown that I'm going to be making for her today is very similar, actually, just like the gown that I'm wearing today. And it's a bit hard to see with all my accessories on here, but the most important feature of this gown that I'm making is actually the back. So I'll turn around real quick. And you can see that the gown is actually cut in one piece from the neck to the hem. And then these pleats are what shape that piece of fabric to the figure. So I'm going to be taking the fabric for Sarah's gown, and I'm going to be placing it on her body, pinning it to her, and then after that I'll sew it. And so that way it's a gown that fits Sarah perfectly. We're not very concerned with sizes because it's just whatever fits you. And there's sort of this saying that you can't really hide anything from your Mantua-Maker or your tailor because they're the ones who get to see everything, but then make the clothing on you to make you look perfect and fashionable. So right now I have enlisted Sarah to help me. She is working on what will be the lining for the back piece of the gown. And I'm working on the actual back of the gown that goes from neck to hem. So eventually we will put our pieces together, and I will pleat this to then fit the lining that she's working on. So we will check back in with you when we get a little further along. This is just part 1 of 2 of making an 18th century gown. Be sure to like the video and ask us any questions you have in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe so that you can stay up to date when we post the second part. Techniques that were used in the 18th century, because you couldn't just walk into a store and have tons of ready-made clothing available.